They made him stand, didn't offer a seat, didn't ask his name, didn't care, just pointed him toward a sticky corner by the vending machine, as if his dark skin disqualified him from every polished chair in the marble lobby. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back. He stood there, silent and still, while bank employees smirked and whispered, dismissing him with every sideways glance like he was a mistake that wandered in off the street. They saw a black man, assumed nothing else mattered, and treated him like background noise. But the man they humiliated that morning wasn't just anyone. And what they didn't know, what they couldn't afford not to know, was that they had just insulted the wrong person. This isn't a story about rage. It's about quiet power, the kind that doesn't shout but dismantles. The kind that waits, then strikes with precision. One act of arrogance, one small cruelty, and the ripple it caused would tear through the walls of a billion-dollar institution. If you're ready for a story built on real stakes, brutal truths, and a revenge they never saw coming, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from. What happens next will change everything. The hum inside Linwood National Bank was the type of silence that wasn't truly quiet. It was the controlled hush of wealth being whispered between polished glass and brushed metal. Phones rang discreetly, documents shuffled under manicured fingers, and the soft clicks of keyboards tapped out numbers that could buy or destroy cities. Every inch of the lobby radiated power wrapped in civility. And when Reuben Maddox stepped through the door, everything changed, but not in the way anyone would acknowledge aloud. The temperature didn't drop, but the energy certainly shifted. It was the kind of pause that wasn't out of awe but discomfort. Reuben's presence, sharp and unassuming, unsettled the pattern of those who believed they understood who belonged within these walls. His coat was a charcoal blend tailored to fit the breadth of his shoulders, his scarf a deep navy, wool tucked with quiet care into his collar, and his gloves clutched beneath one arm alongside a slim leather folio. His walk was purposeful, not hurried, and his eyes never lingered on the opulence of the space. He had seen it all before. Yet no one saw him as familiar. At the reception desk, behind a granite counter that curved like a crescent moon, sat Candace Moore. Her red lipstick was lined to perfection, her posture rigid like a gate set to swing only for those deemed worthy. Her eyes locked on Reuben's face, then dropped, intentionally slow, scanning him from his cuffs to his shoes. The judgment was clear and unhidden. The moment he stopped in front of her, she leaned back in her seat, a smile frozen on her lips that held no welcome. "Private appointments are handled through the South Wing," she said, voice clipped and professional, yet carrying that unmistakable edge, as if informing a trespasser of the rules. Reuben held up the confirmation paper he'd printed that morning. "I'm here to meet Mr. Landon Reed. 10 o'clock. Private banking." His voice was composed, measured, nothing out of place. Candace didn't reach for the paper. Her fingers tapped a lazy rhythm on the desktop. "Name?" she asked. "Reuben Maddox." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly before she took the paper from his hand with the tips of her nails, pinching it like something unsanitary. Without another word, she spun her chair and walked into the interior office space, vanishing behind a frosted door that muted sound but allowed the shadows of people behind it to remain visible. Reuben remained standing. The other clients around the lobby didn't quite look at him directly, but their awareness was obvious. A woman in a tan dress moved her purse closer to her side. A middle-aged man in a navy windbreaker studied Reuben's briefcase like it might start ticking. 2 seats over, a man coughed, more performative than necessary. When Candace returned, she held the paper loosely in one hand and gestured vaguely with the other. "You can wait over there." The place she pointed to was not the upholstered row of seats under the skylight where other private clients were ushered. No, it was a metallic bench that faced the emergency exit, across from the janitor's closet, barely touched by heat or light. Reuben looked at the bench, then back at her. Private clients typically wait in the client lounge. Candace didn't blink. "It's full." He said nothing more. He simply walked to the bench and sat. The bench creaked slightly beneath him. The overhead light buzzed. The edge of its panel darkened from neglect. Across from him, a security camera blinked a lazy red. He opened his folio and glanced down at the papers inside, Financial models, projections, acquisition notes, all irrelevant now. He was no longer a person with business. He was a man waiting for permission to exist. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Around him, clients were greeted by name, offered coffee, walked down halls lined with mahogany trim and soft carpets. Reuben remained seated. At one point, a custodian came through with a mop, dripping water across the tile at Reuben's feet. The smell of bleach bloomed in the air, heavy and sharp. The man said nothing as he passed, and Reuben lifted his shoes without comment as the mop sloshed past. At 45 minutes, he returned to the front counter. Candace was laughing with a junior teller, both of them sipping from disposable cups with whipped cream. Reuben waited until her laughter faded. "May I confirm that my appointment is still active?" he asked, tone low but clear. Candace looked at him slowly, as if he were interrupting something he shouldn't hear. "If you haven't been called yet, it means they're still busy," she said. "You can either sit back down or reschedule." "I'd prefer not to waste anyone's time," Reuben said. "Please verify with Mr. Reed." Candace tapped something on her keyboard without looking at the screen. "He's in a meeting. You're not on today's internal slate." Reuben frowned. "My appointment was confirmed through MS. Carlisle in scheduling." Candace's expression shifted ever so slightly, something flickering behind her eyes, a look of challenge. "Then you'll have to take that up with her," she said, already moving on to another customer approaching from the side. The man she now served was a hedge fund type, red-faced and chatty. She greeted him with exaggerated charm. "Mr. Bernard, always a pleasure. What can I do for you today?" Reuben returned to the bench, though he no longer sat. He remained standing, motionless, watching the way others were escorted through the same doors he had been barred from entering. 15 minutes later, a young man in a vest approached. He looked barely out of college, possibly an intern. "Mr. Maddox?" he asked, cautious. Reuben turned. "Yes. They said you can come back now. Please bring identification." The request was standard, yet the emphasis was off. Something in the phrasing suggested suspicion, not protocol. Reuben followed the intern through the hallway, past portraits of founders and donors, past glass walls revealing high-end offices, until he was led into a small conference room with bare walls and no windows. "Mr. Reed will join you shortly," the intern said, then left. Reuben placed his folio on the table, sat in the lone chair, and waited again. The room had no warmth, no art, no coffee, no amenities, just silence. After another 10 minutes, the door opened, but it wasn't Reed. It was a uniformed security officer. "Mr. Maddox," the man said flatly, "we need you to come with us." "Why?" Reuben asked, not rising. "We've received word of a possible breach in protocol with your appointment. You're not listed on today's authorized meeting log." "I'd like to file a formal incident report," he said. His voice was still calm. That unsettled her more than shouting would have. "Regarding what exactly?" she asked, even though she knew. He placed the form on the desk and began filling it out with a pen from his folio. The pen glided across the paper in steady strokes. Name, time, date, appointment reference number. Candace stepped back from the counter as though proximity to his form might implicate her. She didn't offer help. She didn't speak again. When he finished, he placed the form back on the counter and made eye contact. "Please see that this goes to the Director of Client Relations," he said. "Directly." He left before she could respond. As Reuben crossed the stone-paved plaza, he could feel eyes watching him through the glass. He didn't look back. The walk back to his hotel was uneventful, but his mind was not still. The humiliation hadn't ended with dismissal. It had spread, taking root in subtle, painful ways. Each indifferent stare, every unnecessary delay, every low-level worker operating on unspoken cues, had been complicit in making it clear. This place did not see him as equal. Worse, they had made him feel invisible, but not quiet. His silence had a shape, a weight, one they assumed would go nowhere. The next morning, Reuben returned, not because he was hopeful, but because dignity doesn't bend to mistreatment. He arrived 2 minutes before the bank opened. The sky was the color of bruised steel. He wore a different coat this time, charcoal instead of black, and carried no briefcase, just a folder tucked under one arm. As the automatic doors unlocked, he entered and stood to the side of the lobby. The same security officer from the day before spotted him, but didn't approach. Candace, behind the desk again, froze mid-sip of her latte. Her smile cracked. "Can I help you?" she asked, this time sharper, more alert. "I'm not here for an appointment," Ruben said. "I've been instructed to meet a representative from internal compliance." That wasn't true, but he said it in a tone that made her question whether she'd missed a memo. She reached for her phone. "Who exactly scheduled?" "Miriam Carlisle," Ruben said, naming the scheduling officer from yesterday. It was a guess, but it landed. Candace faltered. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared again through the frosted door. Ruben didn't sit. He stood near the decorative planter beside the velvet rope and waited. Minutes later, a man in a gray suit appeared from the back. A new face, middle-aged, tired eyes. "Mr. Maddox." Ruben nodded. The man extended his hand. "Dale from Client Services. I'll take you to our oversight desk." Ruben followed without a word. He was led through the same hallway he had been denied yesterday, only this time no one interrupted. No one glanced twice. They entered a smaller office with bare walls and a long table surrounded by stiff chairs. Dale gestured for Ruben to sit. "Ms. Carlisle forwarded your feedback form," Dale said. "We're treating it as a level 2 grievance, though I'm sure it was just a miscommunication." "It wasn't," Ruben said. "But I didn't come to argue. I came for a copy of yesterday's appointment record. The one I scheduled. The one your staff claimed didn't exist." Dale hesitated. "Well, those records are not usually shared. Then escalate the request," Ruben said, calm and direct. "I'm entitled to documentation of my own appointments, unless this institution has changed its policy." Dale stood, cleared his throat, and left the room. Ruben sat alone for 10 minutes before he returned with a sealed envelope. "Here's your confirmation," Dale said, setting it on the table like a fragile package. "It's logged under the internal portal." Ruben took the envelope and slid it into his coat. "Then I assume someone altered the schedule yesterday, before I arrived." Dale's expression stiffened. "That would be very serious." "It is," Ruben said. He stood, thanked the man without emotion, and left. Outside, the wind hadn't changed. It still pulled at his collar. But he walked faster now, his pulse quicker. He wasn't simply angry, he was aware. Somewhere in that bank, someone had decided to erase his presence from their records. They hadn't just dismissed him, they tried to remove all trace of his legitimacy. That wasn't error, that was intent. Later that day, back at his hotel, he contacted a private auditing firm he had used before, not to pursue legal action, not yet, just to look at patterns. He asked them to review the past 12 months of Linwood's private banking appointments, flag any clients who'd had appointments canceled without cause. Seth noticed him and straightened. "Mr. Maddox, correct?" he asked. Ruben nodded once. "Yes. I'm following up on documentation and status." "Of course, sir. Please wait one moment while I check the system." Seth turned to his terminal. Ruben stood with his arms relaxed at his sides, not folded, not defensive, just present. But when Candace caught the exchange, she stepped away from her window, walked over, and positioned herself slightly behind and to the side of Seth. "Is there an issue?" she asked, faux concern coating her voice. "Mr. Maddox has returned." Her voice lifted at the end, shaping it like a question, as if his presence still needed confirmation. Ruben said nothing. Seth, oblivious to the tension, replied, "Yes, he's asking about a follow-up on some appointment documentation." "Oh," Candace said, her tone cool. "I thought that matter was already settled." She smiled tightly at Ruben. "Did you forget something?" "I was advised to follow up," Ruben said calmly, not taking the bait. "With Client Services." "Of course," she replied. "We just want to make sure there's no confusion." Seth frowned slightly and refocused on his screen. "It looks like your last appointment file was reviewed by Mr. Dale. I'll send a quick message and ask if he's available now." Ruben nodded again. "Thank you." Candace stood in silence for a moment longer, then walked away without another word. Reuben watched her leave, not with anger, but with the distant clarity of someone who had already read the last chapter of a book and was watching others pretend they knew the ending. Seth received a reply. "You're in luck, sir. Mr. Dale is available. Would you like to come with me?" Reuben followed him past the security post, through the side corridor he had previously been blocked from entering. They passed 2 conference rooms, both filled with soft conversation and quiet laughter, clients sipping drinks, assistants taking notes. None of that warmth extended to the room where Reuben was led. It was the same dull office as before, 4 blank walls, no decor, no natural light. Seth gestured to a chair and said someone would be with him shortly. Reuben sat. He didn't take out his phone. He didn't open his folder. He simply waited. The door opened 10 minutes later, and Dale entered wearing a pinstripe suit and a frown that never left his face. He closed the door behind him and sat without offering a handshake. "Mr. Maddox," he said, "we've reviewed your grievance, and I'm here to clarify some things." "Go ahead," Reuben replied. Dale cleared his throat. The appointment record was located, but due to an administrative error, your time was not properly entered into the public-facing schedule. That's why it was flagged. "And the removal by security?" Reuben asked. "Also a miscommunication," Dale said. "They were responding to a call about an unauthorized visitor in the internal wing. We regret the confusion." "A pattern of errors that affected only me," Reuben said quietly. "Interesting." Dale didn't respond. Instead, he slid a thin envelope across the table. "As a gesture of goodwill, we'd like to offer you a complimentary portfolio review and private consultation, to be scheduled at your convenience." Reuben looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "A free consultation to replace a public humiliation," he said. "Is that the value placed on dignity here?" "It's not intended as compensation," Dale said quickly. "Merely acknowledgement." "Then acknowledge it clearly," Reuben replied. "Did your staff profile me when I walked through that door?" Dale shifted in his seat. "I can't speak to what anyone assumed." "You can," Reuben said, his voice never rising, never cracking. "But you won't." He stood. "This concludes our discussion." Dale opened his mouth to speak again, but Reuben was already walking toward the door. As he exited the room, he passed a hallway where staff paused mid-conversation, watching him move past with the wary respect one gives someone they thought could be ignored, but now realize might carry consequences. He returned to the lobby where Candace still stood behind the counter. Her posture stiffened. Reuben walked up to her and placed the untouched envelope on the desk. "You may keep your offer," he said simply, "but I will be back again. I suggest your team prepares accordingly." He turned and left. Outside, the sky had shifted to a flat gray, rain threatening but not yet falling. Reuben walked with even strides, the city's noise swirling around him like a challenge. That evening, in his suite overlooking the plaza, he opened his laptop and reviewed the preliminary audit data sent from a private firm. The pattern was clear. In the past 12 months, 24 scheduled appointments made by high-income clients of color had been modified, moved, or erased without client request. In 17 of those cases, the handling employees were listed as Candace M. or her department. Most of the affected clients never followed up. Most never returned. None had filed complaints. Reuben stared at the screen for several minutes, then began drafting a new message, not to the bank, but to a legal advisory firm specializing in institutional bias. He laid out the pattern, attached the redacted data, and requested a formal meeting. She busied herself with a stack of unfiled forms, her fingers clumsy, the rhythm of her motions disrupted by something far less visible than threat: uncertainty. Reuben didn't break stride. He approached the same desk where Seth had stood before and waited until a new face greeted him, a younger woman with a careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you?" Reuben opened the folder and slid a printed document across the surface. It was a formal request for access to all logs, transcripts, and records of his previous interactions with the bank under a provision that most clients never invoked because they didn't know it existed. He had found it buried in an appendix of the client policy disclosures, and now he was using it like a scalpel. This needs to go to your compliance director. Not customer service, not a branch manager. Compliance, he said evenly. The woman's eyes scanned the document, her brow furrowed just enough to betray her confusion. Of course. I'll have someone from that team come down shortly. Would you like to take a seat while you wait? She asked, motioning toward the lobby chairs. Reuben didn't move. I'll stand. The woman nodded and stepped away, speaking in hushed tones over a phone line tucked just out of earshot. Reuben watched her movements, not with scrutiny, but with the same quiet awareness he had carried for weeks. These people weren't cruel in the way books or films like to portray. They weren't snarling villains or overt monsters. They were polite. They were procedural. They believed in systems because they had built them. And in building those systems, they had forgotten the humanity inside them. After 8 minutes, a man in a gray blazer appeared from the hallway, flanked by another who wore a discreet lapel badge. Mr. Maddox, please come with us, the first man said. Reuben nodded and followed. He was led to a glass-walled room, this time, an upgrade from the previous featureless tombs he had been offered. Inside, a coffee carafe sat on a corner table, untouched. 2 chairs faced each other over a table stacked with files. The men offered him a seat, and Reuben took it. They sat opposite. The man with the badge spoke first. We received your request. Normally, internal records are not released without a court directive. But given the circumstances, we are prepared to allow limited supervised review of applicable data. Applicable data? Reuben asked. Please define that. The man hesitated. Interaction logs, access timestamps, communication records tied directly to your client profile. All of it, Reuben said. Not selective pieces. Not sanitized notes. That's outside protocol. Then adjust the protocol, Reuben said. Or you'll be speaking through counsel next time. The man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, then opened a laptop on the table. We'll provide the last 90 days, he said. Reuben nodded. That will be acceptable for now. As the screen was turned toward him, Reuben scrolled through page after page of interaction records. He noted entries where he had been marked as non-responsive, missed, and even canceled by client. All lies. He paused at one line in particular, a manual override submitted under Candace's employee code, marking his appointment as suspicious activity, flagged. That wasn't a clerical error. That was a decision. He turned the screen back to them. This is a falsification of scheduling data, he said. Who approved this? It appears to have been submitted independently, the man replied. There is no record of managerial authorization. Convenient, Reuben said, but not surprising. He stood, not asking permission. I'll be requesting full copies of these records through legal channels. You'll be notified accordingly. Mr. Maddox, we're hoping to resolve this matter internally, the first man said. Public exposure could harm our brand. Reuben stopped at the door. So did your behavior. He left them in silence. As he walked out, he passed a hallway where he caught a glimpse of Dale speaking with another employee. Their conversation died the moment Reuben passed. No one stopped him. Outside, the wind had softened. The sky was clear, winter sun hitting the buildings with a hard, cold light that left no shadows to hide in. Reuben didn't look back. Back at his hotel, he forwarded a copy of the appointment override entry to his legal contact. He followed it with a brief summary and requested escalation. That night, as he reviewed further audit data, another pattern emerged. Several other clients had experienced the same override, and each entry had originated from the same branch. Some had been duplicated, their names replaced with blank entries. Others had been rerouted to lower-tier financial reps without consent. In each instance, the clients had one thing in common. Every last one was a person of color. The realization didn't shock him. It confirmed what he had already known in his bones. The system wasn't broken. It was working as it had been allowed to. He documented the evidence, compiled screenshots, saved transcripts. Everything was organized by date, by individual, by function. He didn't cry out for justice. He prepared to show the rot. Meanwhile, inside Linwood National Bank, Dale sat alone in the same glass-walled room, reading the internal review summary that had just been sent from compliance. His name appeared 3 times in questionable overrides. He leaned back in his chair, the polished surface suddenly cold against his spine. He had thought the whole thing would go away, that it would blow over, the way most complaints did. But Reuben hadn't raised his voice. Dale received a request to appear before a regional ethics committee, a group so rarely convened that some employees didn't know it existed. His composure cracked in places he thought were solid, the edges of his confidence blunted by the realization that silence had become a liability. Candace, meanwhile, spent her days sorting forms that no longer held their usual distraction. Each document she filed reminded her that someone somewhere might be watching, might be measuring the spaces where protocol had failed and prejudice had taken root. She smiled less. She spoke less. And every time the lobby doors opened, her breath caught, just for a second. The fallout had begun. Across the city, Reuben sat in a dark paneled office atop the 54th floor of a tower lined with tinted glass and guarded elevators. The room wasn't his, but the authority within it answered to him now. He had scheduled the meeting quietly, choosing not to use his usual boardroom downtown. The partner from a legal firm sat across from him, flipping slowly through a growing file of exhibits, charts, timestamps, and staff activity logs pulled from Linwood's own digital infrastructure. "This is deeper than client mismanagement," the attorney said without looking up. "We're looking at structural profiling, policy being bent around personal judgment." Reuben didn't respond immediately. He stared through the tinted window at the skyline, the high-rises dull against the overcast sky. "Prepare a formal complaint to the Financial Review Board," he said. "Copy the State Commission. We'll give them a window to respond before we escalate further." The attorney nodded. "And if they stall, then we file federal," Reuben said. "Let them learn the cost of selective oversight." As the paperwork took shape, another message was quietly delivered to the bank's executive office. The envelope contained no threat, only facts, a precise summary of the findings so far, and a request for institutional acknowledgement of wrongful treatment backed by documented evidence. The sender's name wasn't emblazoned across the top. It was printed in small, neat font, Reuben Maddox, partner, Warden Ridge Capital. No titles, no demands, just the quiet authority of someone who had not forgotten, who had not forgiven, and who had prepared. Inside the bank, the document moved from desk to desk, from legal to PR, from compliance to HR. Each recipient read it with growing discomfort. The silence around Reuben's name had collapsed. No one in the upper tier of management could ignore it now. By Monday morning, the regional director of Linwood arrived unannounced at the branch where it all began. His presence disrupted everything. Staff straightened their postures, filtered their conversations, and cleared schedules to make room for a visit they knew was no courtesy call. He didn't shake hands. He didn't ask questions. He walked through the halls with a clipboard and an expression that offered no comfort. Dale was called into the conference room first. His responses were rehearsed, but his delivery faltered under the director's unflinching stare. "You failed to verify documentation," the director said. "You failed to follow up on a flag file you now know was legitimate. What part of your process do you believe protected the client?" Dale stammered. There was confusion regarding scheduling, and there was no confusion, the director interrupted. There was a choice, and it was the wrong one. Dale didn't reply. Candace was next. She entered with a folder tucked under one arm, hoping the presence of paperwork would lend her credibility. It didn't. The director didn't ask about documents. He asked about behavior. "Explain why you redirected a private banking client to the general kiosk despite evidence of a scheduled appointment." "I wasn't aware of the appointment's confirmation at the time," she answered. "Protocol advises we verify all client entries before allowing access. Protocol does not permit judgment in lieu of evidence," the director said. "And it certainly does not include mocking or dismissing clients in front of other patrons." Her mouth went dry. The next hour was filled with interviews, reviews, replays of security footage, and hard conversations that left no room for comfort. Word spread fast among the staff. Something had changed. What had once been protected by casual smiles and confident dismissal was now being weighed and cataloged. Outside the walls of the bank, Reuben continued his work. He wasn't vindictive. He was methodical. He met with 2 other clients who had also been denied appointments at Linwood's private banking office without cause. Both were hesitant at first, wary of challenging a system that had quietly excluded them. But Reuben didn't ask them to fight. He simply shared his data, the facts, the patterns, the numbers. When they saw how much of their own experience matched what had happened to him, they agreed to lend their voices, not through social media or interviews, but through affidavits, official and traceable. Reuben added them to the case. The legal pressure increased. News of the investigation had not yet reached the public, but journalists were sniffing at the edges. One inquiry came through the firm's public contact line, phrased politely but laced with curiosity. Reuben instructed his team not to respond. Not yet. He didn't want headlines. He wanted change. Inside Linwood's upper offices, the board convened an emergency session. The conversation was cold, clinical, and sharp. "We're not just dealing with one man's anger," the COO said. "We're facing reputational collapse if this expands." "Do we settle?" someone asked. "We don't have a demand," the legal advisor answered. "Not yet. But if we wait, we'll lose control of the narrative." "Who the hell is this Maddox guy?" a board member asked. Silence followed. Then one voice said what the others had only suspected. "He's not just a client. He's a stakeholder. Warden Ridge owns equity across our holding company. He's been sitting in board meetings 2 floors above us, watching." And now, Reuben Maddox's name was no longer just that of a problematic visitor. It was a fault line beneath their feet. The bank's executive team had ordered all regional managers to conduct visible reviews across their branches, hoping to demonstrate compliance and cultural awareness before regulators arrived with their own questions. But behind closed doors, the tone was no longer defensive. It was fearful. The legal pressure was escalating. The documents too precise, the patterns undeniable. Still, Reuben had yet to speak publicly. He hadn't reached out to the media. He hadn't posted a statement. He simply let the facts breathe. And in doing so, he let the institution suffocate on its own paper trail. Inside the branch that had first humiliated him, the morning opened with a team-wide meeting. Candace sat 2 chairs from the end of the row, her jaw clenched, heart stiff with dread. The branch director stood at the front, reading from a prepared statement about organizational integrity and the importance of respectful service, her voice dull with obligation. No one asked questions. No one challenged anything. But when the meeting ended, Candace was asked to stay behind. So was Dale. The rest of the staff filtered out in silence, careful not to meet their eyes. The door closed behind them, and a senior compliance officer entered the room. She carried no clipboard, no tablet, just a single envelope and a calmness so thorough it was frightening. She placed the envelope on the desk. "This contains internal transcripts, digital correspondence, and access records," she said plainly. "You'll be asked to review and provide written explanations for each incident marked in red." Candace didn't reach for it. "Will there be legal charges?" she asked. The officer's expression didn't change. "That's not for me to decide, but I would suggest honesty. The pattern is extensive." Dale remained silent, jaw tight, gaze fixed on the envelope as though it might explode. The officer turned and left without further comment. That envelope stayed unopened for the next 40 minutes, sitting between them like a ticking metronome. When Candace finally opened it, the first page wasn't about Reuben. It was about another client, a woman whose appointment she'd redirected to a teller despite her wealth credentials. The pattern continued on the next page and the one after. Each file revealed timestamps, notes, override codes, and decision paths. Candace's initials appeared more times than she had expected, each one a marker of when she had chosen dismissal over dignity. Dale skimmed his own section with shaking hands, recognizing the casual emails he had written in mockery. The internal memos he had altered to align with Candace's corrections, and the approval he had given to system changes he never should have touched. They both sat in silence long after the folder was closed. Across town, Reuben sat in a quiet meeting room within Warden Ridge Capital's headquarters, a conference space made of polished concrete and high glass. A screen glowed before him, displaying the final version of the report prepared by the auditing firm. The data no longer read like statistics. It read like indictment. 27 flagged appointments, 18 deliberately rerouted, 9 client profiles altered without consent, 6 recorded staff actions that violated institutional policy, 3 names repeated through every entry. Reuben's was not among them. He hadn't needed to be. He had only ever asked to be treated fairly, and when denied that, he had asked for answers. It was the answers that had broken the silence. And now, for the first time, he was preparing to speak. He nodded to the firm's public relations director. "Proceed," he said. Within the hour, a press release was quietly distributed to 3 financial oversight agencies and 2 major news outlets. It included no inflammatory language. It made no accusations. It merely presented the data, verified and supported, with a statement from Warden Ridge Capital confirming that it had withdrawn its silent holding investment from Linwood's parent company, citing ethical misalignment in service delivery and procedural fairness. That was all it took. The news broke by midday. By early afternoon, social feeds flickered with headlines that read like verdicts. Discrimination allegations surface at Linwood Bank. Private wealth clients speak out. Warden Ridge divests from major bank over bias findings. Inside the branch, phones began to ring. First it was upper management demanding explanations. Then it was journalists requesting comments. Then it was clients, long-time depositors, high-value accounts, all asking the same questions. What happened? Why weren't we told? Are we next? The lobby became an island of forced smiles and stiff reassurances. Candace continued to sit at her desk, but no clients were routed to her. Dale no longer walked freely through the building. His key card had been limited. The staff watched everything with nervous glances and whispered tones. Reuben never appeared. He didn't need to. He had become a shadow moving through their systems, a reminder that silence never guarantees invisibility. In a private conversation later that week, the regional director admitted to the board, "We didn't lose him because he shouted. We lost him because he didn't." No one checked their phones. No one spoke out of turn. They were here because Reuben had summoned them, not out of ego, but necessity. In front of each person sat a slim envelope containing 2 sheets of paper. The first outlined Linwood National's pattern of infractions with a detailed timeline. The second was a letter, short, firm, and final. Reuben began speaking without notes, his voice low and certain. "As of today, we will cease all partnership interactions with Linwood National and its affiliated institutions. We will reallocate our holdings to rival service groups with cleaner oversight histories and more transparent diversity practices." He paused and looked at each director. "And we will not issue a public campaign to shame them. They have already shamed themselves." The silence around the table was not of disagreement, but of awe. None of them had ever seen Reuben this focused, this precise. Most had known him as calm, logical, an investor who believed in correction rather than destruction. But today they understood what it looked like when he was no longer willing to wait for correction. As the meeting ended, a press office director approached him privately and asked if he wanted to prepare a speech for potential interviews. Reuben shook his head. No speech. The numbers speak louder than any soundbite. Across town, the branch that had dismissed him now operated under mandatory oversight. A temporary compliance officer reviewed every transaction over $10,000, and every private client interaction had to be logged with timestamps and voice recordings. Staff morale fell into a quiet collapse. Conversations became sterile. Clients walked in with questions and walked out with withdrawal slips. Meanwhile, Candace sat in her office, not working but waiting. She knew something else was coming. The envelope from her disciplinary hearing had not included a verdict, only a notice that she would be informed of the board's decision within 72 hours. Her confidence, once fueled by her ability to manipulate perception and policy, had evaporated. She had thought Ruben was just another man stepping into a space he didn't belong. She hadn't known who he was. She hadn't known what he carried. And now, her future sat somewhere in the balance of the institution she once weaponized. Dale's reassignment turned into a silent termination. His badge was disabled on a Thursday morning. He wasn't escorted out. He wasn't spoken to. He simply showed up to work and couldn't get past the turnstile. The finality of it felt surreal. He stood outside the glass doors, staring at the staff who watched him from behind frosted windows, none of them willing to open the door. It was over, and no one said a word. That same day, a call was placed to Linwood's executive office from an unknown number. The receptionist answered with protocol, only to hear a soft voice ask for the director of corporate partnerships. The voice was polite, measured, and carried a weight that needed no volume. The receptionist transferred the call immediately. When the director picked up, he didn't speak at first. The voice on the other end did. "My name is Ruben Maddox. I believe your team knows why I'm calling." The director stammered. Yes, Mr. Maddox. We've received your correspondence and reviewed the filings. We're currently in the process of adjusting internal policy and conducting a third-party audit. I'm not calling to hear your process," Ruben interrupted. "I'm calling to ask one question." The line went still. Why didn't anyone intervene sooner? The director hesitated. "We weren't aware of the depth of the issue at the time." Ruben remained silent. "We assumed the problem was isolated," the director added, "that it had been handled. Clearly we were wrong." "Yes," Ruben said, "you were." Then he ended the call. He didn't wait for apologies. He didn't need them. That evening, while seated in a quiet corner of a private club, Ruben met with an independent ethics investigator appointed by the State Commission. The investigator was young, sharp-eyed, and respectful. She asked questions carefully, not assuming anything, letting Ruben take his time. He walked her through every document, every timestamp, every redacted name that had since been restored. He explained the subtle manipulations, the moments of denial disguised as policy, the diversions crafted as customer service. He didn't focus on emotion. He focused on truth. When he finished, the investigator leaned back and closed her notepad. "This isn't just a civil issue," she said. "It's cultural, it's structural, and it's personal for a lot of people." "It's personal," Ruben agreed. "But it didn't start with me." The next morning, a closed-door hearing was held by the Financial Ethics Board. Linwood executives were summoned, but not allowed to speak during the first half. Instead, the board presented evidence. Every document Ruben had gathered, every overwritten appointment, every digital action that couldn't be explained away. When the presentation ended, the room was silent. One member finally spoke. "It takes years to build trust in institutions. It takes one client to prove how easily it can be destroyed." Ruben wasn't in that room. He didn't need to be. His name wasn't even mentioned in the official transcript. But everyone knew who had started the cascade. Everyone knew who had refused to be erased. And by the time Candace received her final verdict, summary termination with prejudice noted in her employee file, she didn't cry. She didn't argue. Their public relations team had scrambled to spin the story. Their compliance departments churned out polished drafts of new initiatives, and their legal teams sent carefully worded settlement offers to Ruben's counsel. None were accepted. Ruben didn't want hush money. He wanted record. That meant something different. That meant no secrecy clauses. That meant no denials hidden beneath check stubs. That meant names attached to actions. That meant documented acknowledgement. And so far, none of their offers included what he considered the bare minimum. On the fourth morning following the Ethics Board's review, an invitation arrived from Linwood's new acting president requesting a private meeting. The email was formal, the tone respectful, but Ruben could see the urgency underneath the words. He replied with a short message confirming his attendance under the condition that the meeting be documented and that no non-disclosure agreements be required. They agreed within 15 minutes. The meeting was scheduled at Linwood's central headquarters, not the branch where everything began, but the heart of their national operations, a polished monolith of concrete and glass nestled between corporate towers. Ruben arrived 10 minutes early, escorted silently by security through a side entrance. No one greeted him with the usual pageantry. He was taken directly to the executive floor, where a long table waited, surrounded by unfamiliar faces that wore expensive suits and carefully curated expressions. He recognized only a few: the acting president, 2 board members, and 1 former compliance director, now acting as internal counsel. The room held its breath as Ruben entered and took the chair reserved at the far end. There were no refreshments offered, no pleasantries. The acting president began without preamble. "Mr. Maddox, we want to acknowledge first and foremost that the treatment you received within our institution was unacceptable. It failed every standard we claim to uphold." Her voice was steady but tight. Ruben didn't respond. He wanted to see how far they would go without prompting. "Our internal review," she continued, "has confirmed that procedural bias, data manipulation, and systemic disregard for client dignity occurred within our private banking operations. Several employees have been dismissed. Policies are being rewritten. Oversight will be expanded." Ruben nodded once, slowly, and the word landed without emphasis, but the room shifted. One of the board members leaned forward. "We are prepared to issue a public statement recognizing the failures and outlining corrective measures. We are also prepared to support third-party audits and diversity training across all branches." Ruben let the silence stretch before he answered. "Your statement must name the individuals responsible." A pause. The president cleared her throat. "There are legal limitations too. You'll find a way," Ruben said. "Because your silence is part of the problem. I didn't walk into your branch asking for favors. I asked for the service your institution claims to offer. I was denied, profiled, and redirected. Not because of oversight, because of presumption. That presumption has names. And I'm not going to let you protect them from consequence." The board exchanged glances. The counsel shifted in his seat. "We could include anonymized descriptors and a commitment to future transparency." Ruben raised his hand, and the man fell silent. "No descriptors. No ambiguity. You say you want to change the culture of your bank. Start by naming what it allowed. Start by admitting who made the decisions that shaped that culture. You say you want reform. I want truth." The room stayed silent, weighed down by a truth they could no longer sidestep. After several long moments, the president nodded. "We will revise the statement. The names will be included." "And the clients?" Ruben asked. "The ones denied service. The ones profiled. The ones who walked away without a voice. We will contact them directly and offer restitution," she replied. "Not hush money," Ruben said. "Acknowledgement." "Acknowledgement," she repeated. Ruben stood. "Then we're finished here." "There is one more thing," the board member said. "We would like to invite you to serve as an external advisor for our accountability task force, to ensure these changes are more than surface." Ruben looked at him, not with surprise, but with calculation. "You want me to rebuild what you broke? We want you to help us build what should have existed from the beginning." Ruben considered this. "I'll think about it," he said. And then he left. Outside, the sky was clear, no longer draped in rain or thunderclouds. The city didn't look different, but it felt different. Something had shifted, not because of one man, but because one man had refused to be silent in the face of normalization. That afternoon, Linwood National Bank released its public statement. It named Candace Moore and Dale Hennings among the terminated employees. It acknowledged the wrongful treatment of multiple clients. It confirmed that private appointment schedules had been altered to redirect clients of color to lower-level service options. It pledged ongoing audits, a restructure of client engagement protocols, and an open invitation for affected individuals to engage with restitution programs. The financial world took note. Media outlets covered the statement. Ethics organizations praised the transparency. Advocacy groups called it a first step. The name Reuben Maddox circulated without headline or fanfare, spoken in tones of respect and caution. He had not demanded attention, yet he had received it, not because of volume, but because of precision. At Linwood's central headquarters, the aftershocks continued. Employee morale collapsed beneath layers of new oversight and compliance procedures. Every interaction now required documentation. Every staff member received mandatory training sessions overseen by external monitors. Internal chats, once littered with coded jokes and casual dismissals, fell silent. Everyone understood the rules had changed, not because the bank had rewritten them, but because someone had finally forced them to read what they had ignored. In the branch where Reuben had first been dismissed, 3 tellers resigned within 48 hours of the public statement. Not because they had been named or reprimanded, but because they could no longer work within walls that now watched them with unfamiliar intensity. Candace Moore did not return to that branch. Her termination was final, and her employee file was flagged with notations that disqualified her from future eligibility across every subsidiary under Linwood's corporate umbrella. She had no severance, no farewell party, no chance to explain away her actions as misunderstanding. What she had once done without consequence was now permanently recorded, her legacy carved not into a resume, but into public record. She sat alone in her apartment, reading article after article, watching her name pass through headlines, her actions dissected by analysts and editorial columns. She had assumed that dismissal came with grace, with dignity preserved in private. She had been wrong. The consequences had not arrived with vengeance or spectacle. They had arrived with accuracy. Dale Hennings, once a manager who had casually signed off on manipulation and exclusion, was formally barred from working in financial client services for 5 years under a state-level ethics restriction. His new position at a lesser institution fell through when his name appeared in an internal search result. No firm wanted to touch him now. He had not broken laws, but he had broken trust. And in the world of finance, trust was the only currency that couldn't be rebought once spent. He filed a quiet appeal, which was quietly denied. His career had not ended, but it had been altered in ways that could not be undone. Meanwhile, the Federal Regulatory Board opened an inquiry into Linwood's broader internal structures, requesting full transparency on hiring practices, appointment systems, and escalation protocols. Linwood complied, not out of integrity, but necessity. Their stock dipped. Investor confidence wavered. And all the while, Reuben remained absent from the noise. He did not attend the panel discussions now forming around systemic bias in wealth institutions. He did not grant interviews. He declined invitations to speak on justice panels or diversity summits. Instead, he turned inward, focusing on the clients who had been part of his original investigation, helping them pursue quiet, complete resolutions through the same process he had used. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He was trying to finish the work. He had not destroyed Linwood. He had made it face itself. And in that reflection, the institution had cracked. One morning, nearly a month after the initial fallout, Reuben received a handwritten letter delivered by courier. The envelope bore no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of simple stationery. The writing was clean, steady, unembellished. It came from one of the clients who had once been denied service, someone Reuben had never met in person. The note read, "You didn't have to fight for people like me, but you did. And because of that, I walked into a new bank last week, and they didn't ask me to wait near the back. They shook my hand. They knew my name. I think that started with you." Reuben placed the note in his drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the change hadn't come through confrontation. It had come through refusal. Refusal to accept the version of himself others tried to write on his behalf. Refusal to leave without his name being restored to the record. Refusal to believe that dignity was negotiable. At Linwood, the new Accountability Task Force issued its first recommendations. Among them was a policy that required all appointment reassignments to be reviewed by an independent auditor, and that any deviation from scheduled client services must be flagged with a justification file that could not be altered once submitted. Additionally, the task force introduced a rotating council of external advisors, community leaders, financial advocates, and ethics officers to oversee implementation. Rubin declined the invitation to join the council, citing conflict of interest. But he nominated 3 people in his place, all clients once erased from the system, each with a reason to stay involved. The board accepted them. One of Rubin's final contributions came through an open letter, published not through a press outlet, but as an op-ed in a quarterly journal on ethics in business. The piece, titled "The Cost of Dismissal," outlined how institutions often confuse silence with acquiescence, and how politeness is not the same as fairness. It described not his experience by name, but the pattern, how quiet prejudice operated not through slurs or laws, but through quiet turns of the head, misplaced files, and the denial of presence. It concluded with a single sentence that echoed in the minds of everyone who read it. The erosion of dignity is often slow, but so is the return of consequence. The letter became required reading in several compliance trainings across regional banks. Not because it was loud, but because it made things clear. And clarity, in places long protected by polite obscurity, was revolution enough. When the federal inquiry concluded, Linwood avoided fines, but was ordered to submit to 2 years of external oversight and public reporting. By the beginning of the 3rd month, the institution that had once turned away Rubin Maddox, without hesitation, now bore his shadow in every corner of its operations. Linwood National Bank's executive team had stabilized its public posture, but beneath the surface, the company functioned like a patient in recovery, aware of its injuries, alert to the potential for relapse, and forced to acknowledge the treatments it had resisted until the pain became unbearable. Rubin never returned to Linwood's headquarters. He did not need to. His absence held more presence than most men's fury. Still, the changes he triggered began to reach beyond walls and procedures, transforming people who once believed themselves immune to consequence. Among those people was Candace Moore, once the queen of polite refusal, once the smiling face behind the counter who wielded microaggression with surgical precision. Her fall had not been publicized beyond the bank's disclosures, yet she had become something of a pariah within the network of professionals who once admired her confidence and modeled her control. When she applied for positions in other firms, the interviews always ended the same way, with polite interest that cooled the moment her history was mentioned. It wasn't the firing that doomed her. It was the reason. She had not stolen money, but she had stolen access, stolen trust, stolen the unspoken agreement between client and institution that says fairness is not conditional. She spent her days in a modest apartment, revising a resume she knew would never erase what had already been written in the public record. At first, she blamed everyone else, the investigators, the auditors, the policies that had betrayed her. She told herself Rubin had overreacted, had turned a misunderstanding into a spectacle. But as the weeks passed, her certainty began to decay. She remembered things she had told herself to forget, moments where she had made judgments in the space between first glance and first word, decisions born not of data or duty, but of something quieter and uglier. She remembered the smirk she had hidden behind policy, the way she had spoken slowly to clients she considered out of place, the patronizing calm she had learned to weaponize as a shield from accountability. She began to read, not headlines, not editorials, but reports, essays, historical breakdowns of systemic bias in institutions like hers. She joined online seminars, not to speak, but to listen. At first, she listened with resistance. Then she listened with discomfort. Finally, she listened with humility. One evening, she opened a document on her computer and began to write, not a message to Rubin, not a public apology, but a letter to herself, describing the person she had been and the blind certainty she had carried as a kind of armor. She didn't publish it. She didn't share it. But she rewrote it again and again, as if trying to understand how the smallest dismissals, stacked together, could crush someone's sense of belonging without ever raising a voice. On the other side of the city, Dale Hennings faced a different evolution. Unlike Candace, he had not spiraled into isolation. He had tried to rebuild quickly, applying for roles in adjacent industries, shifting his tone in interviews to match the new language of inclusivity. But nothing stuck. His reputation preceded him, and it brought with it a silence louder than any rejection. One morning, while standing in line at a small community bank, he watched as the teller greeted an older black woman with familiarity and warmth. She knew her name. She asked about her grandchildren. She didn't rush. She didn't posture. Dale stood there and realized how far he had fallen, not in title or salary, but in understanding. He had never truly known what he had until he saw someone else do it better with nothing but respect. That night, he logged into a certification program focused on ethics in financial service. Not because he believed it would redeem him, but because he wanted to learn what he had refused to see. For the first time in years, he felt small, but he also felt awake. Meanwhile, Linwood's internal culture began to shift. The new compliance protocols didn't eliminate bias, but they made it harder to hide. Staff who once moved freely now answered to data audits and monthly evaluations that tracked behavioral patterns. A digital flag now alerted supervisors if appointment overrides occurred too frequently under one employee's credentials. Human resources underwent restructuring, placing oversight under an external advisory council. And slowly, those who remained began to notice something different, not just the fear of punishment, but the emergence of reflection. Conversations became harder, but more honest. No more nodding without comprehension. No more polite ignorance. What had once been a closed circuit of exclusion was now an ecosystem under observation, not by force, but by necessity. And at the edge of that transformation was the quiet presence of the man who had refused to be invisible. Reuben Maddox continued his work not as a watchdog or a reformer, but as a steward of memory. He did not chase every injustice. He chose his battles carefully. But whenever a client reached out to him with a story of being turned away, of being profiled, of being told indirectly that they didn't belong, he listened. He offered guidance. He showed them the path he had walked, not to replicate it, but to remind them that dignity was not granted by policy or favor. It was inherent, and it was worth defending. One afternoon, while leaving a lunch meeting, Reuben passed by a small branch of another bank. The interior was modest, the sign above the door unremarkable. But inside, he noticed something. A young teller stood at the counter, assisting an elderly man who was having trouble understanding a form. The teller didn't rush. He didn't sigh. He leaned in, explained each section, and waited until the man nodded with understanding. Reuben watched for a moment, unnoticed. Then he smiled, not because the system had been fixed, but because it was being tended to by people who still believed in care. That night, Reuben sat on his balcony, a cup of coffee in his hand, the city stretching out below. He thought of the journey, not just the one he had taken, but the one that had unfolded before him. A journey of systems long shielded by bureaucracy, now forced into visibility. A journey of names that had once passed through doors unseen, now etched into the story of reform. He thought of Candace, of Dale, of others he would never meet, but who now carried the weight of recognition. He did not hate them. He had never wanted to ruin them. He had only wanted them to see. And now perhaps they did. In the end, the story was not about punishment. It was about understanding the price of dismissal, the cost of pretending that civility could cover contempt, and the power of one man's choice to remain present, even when every door tried to turn him away. Reuben had not raised his voice. He had raised the record. And now, in that space where silence once lived, truth had taken root. The systems had not healed, but they had been touched. And for the first time in a long time, those inside them were beginning to look inward instead of away. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful, emotionally driven narratives like it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal hidden truths. I'd love to hear what you thought about the plot, what moments stood out, what twists surprised you, and how the ending landed for you. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching or reading from. It's always amazing to see how far stories like this can reach. Your voice matters here. Drop a comment, join the conversation, and be part of the community that believes in the power of meaningful storytelling.